So the goal of the shadow work is to make the shadow conscious, or is that possible in your perspective? In other words, is it all these things that we're disowning, not willing to face about ourselves, the good sides, the bad sides that we can't see as me, all of that, the goal is to reach a place where it's all been re-owned and reclaimed so there's no kind of shadow left? Or is there always a shadow?
I think my guess is that there's always a shadow, and that shadow in some ways is what drives evolution. If we look at it from a structure stage perspective for just a moment, we could say that each of the structure stages, amber has a whole set of wisdoms and qualities that emerge, and it's precisely the shadow of amber that helps move us into orange or into the rational materialistic phase, that it's the impersonality, the overemphasis on success, the self-interest of, the capitalist move that moves us to the green level, to the pluralistic level, to the sensitive self. So you could say in a certain way that shadow is actually a driver in our development. And I think that it's also true in our individual development and through states, that there's some really deep intelligence in each of us that doesn't reveal or, in other words, someone can have extreme trauma, and that trauma doesn't start to come to the surface until someone is actually ready to integrate that. So I think one way we can look at a dimension of spiritual practice, and it's not the entire, spiritual practice as we're starting to learn and conceive about it is actually a vast field of work, and that our lives are mutually entailing, as Michael Murphy said, so that what we neglect will appear. But there's this dimension of our own unfolding that has to do with the content of our unconscious, that which we were early injured by, shamed by, marginalized in our conditioning or in our particular life experience. And as we're ready to experience things, they start to come forward. And as we're ready to experience things in the collective, they start to come forward. So you'll notice that as we move through time, certain issues start to emerge. Like there's a period of time where sexual abuse suddenly becomes a huge issue. And it shows up in the churches, and it shows up. People are now willing to talk about it in their families, and there's a way that it was put away. And until the collective could start to deal with that quality of shadow, there was no way that we could do that. And so my point is, I think there's always a kind of unfolding that because we're at work in a dualism, that the dual is part of our experience, that the integration of that which continues to make us uncomfortable is simultaneously what frees us. And so what I'm saying I don't think is in contradiction to what you're describing as the Tao. It's simply the more that we integrate of ourselves and the more that we integrate of the world, the freer we are to interact with that without being caught or in some ways distorted by what's being reflected. Like you can see reality clearly without being provoked.